Start by doing something you may not expect from a tech founder at a technology conference. I want to slow us down because most conversations happening right now about artificial intelligence are moving far too fast. We are surrounded by language that celebrates acceleration, faster systems, smarter models, better optimization, more scale. And on the surface, that all sounds reasonable, even responsible, but I want to suggest something that may feel uncomfortable. Better is not a neutral goal. Better always assumes a direction. Better always assumes a measure. And better always assumes we have already agreed on what matters. And too often we have not. So today I'm not here to argue for better. I'm here to argue for different. In technology, better usually means faster, cheaper, more automated, more efficient. But those qualities do not exist in a vacuum. They shape behavior, they shape institutions, they shape culture. When systems are optimized primarily for speed, people are pushed to move faster than judgment allows. And when systems are optimized primarily for scale, decision-making becomes abstracted from accountability. And when systems are optimized primarily for efficiency, which is a word that's been saturated throughout the legal tech industry, context becomes a liability instead of the asset. That is not a technical failure. That's not a technical failure. That is a philosophical one. The dominant AI paradigm optimizes for generalization, the most accurate answer across the widest possible distribution of inputs. But legal work is the opposite of that. It is irreducibly particular. The facts of this case, the tendencies of this judge, the history of this firm's settlements, the risk tolerance of this client. Generalization is not just unhelpful in law, it can be actively hostile to good legal judgment. So when legal AI is built for generalization, trained on the broadest possible data set, optimized to be right on average, the gaps do not show up as errors. They show up as confidence. And confident errors in legal practice are the most dangerous kind. Before I built a technology company, my work was visual. I was a professional photographer, sports documentary, photojournalism. That work placed me ringside at high-stakes sporting events where milliseconds determined outcomes and pressure is physically visible. And it placed me in communities far from home, documenting lives shaped by very different constraints than my own. Those two worlds taught me the same lesson. Context is everything. In sports, a single moment can define an entire career, but only if you understand what led up to it. In documentary work, a single image can mislead or illuminate, depending entirely on what is framed and what is left out. That is when I learned something technology often forgets. You could look at the same moment, the same data, the same facts, and still tell very different truths. Not because one version is false, but because framing is power. And perspective shapes what becomes possible. Two photographers standing in the same room will produce different images, not because one is more skilled, but because they position themselves differently. They chose different angles. They decided what deserved to be in focus. That choice is never neutral, and neither is the image that results. Technology does the same thing. AI does not simply analyze reality, it frames it. It decides what is visible, what is emphasized, what is ignored, what is treated as noise instead of signal. And the people who build the system decide the frame. That is not a neutral act. That is a responsibility. Law is not abstract. It determines whether families stay together, whether someone is compensated after injury, whether someone keeps their home, whether someone feels protected or abandoned by the system. I came to understand that early. I've been with my husband since we were in high school. His family has run a plaintiff side law firm for over 30 years. And for more than 2 decades, I watched that world from the inside. I've watched my husband move through that firm, making copies, running documents as a courier, working as a manager, eventually becoming the head of their IT department. I watched the attorneys build their practice around contingency work, cases other firms declined, people who had experienced real harm and needed someone to stand with them. And what I observed over all of those years was this. A lot of the most important knowledge in that environment was never formally captured. It lived in people's judgment, in conversations, and experience built slowly over time. At the same time, those same people were responsible for decisions that carried real weight. So it led me to a question. When a system provides an answer in that environment, what happens next? Not just the output, what happens after? Who carries the decision forward? Who is accountable for the outcome? Can the person using it actually stand behind it? In high-stakes environments, that question is not secondary. It is the question. There is something else I noticed. The tools that help legal teams work more consistently, make better decisions, and develop over time as an organization, those tools have not been evenly available. They were built for a certain kind of firm, and the firms closest to the communities they serve, smaller practices, plaintiff side work, attorneys doing the most consequential cases with the least infrastructure, were not the first people in the room. Not because their needs are smaller, but because they were not the design premise. The gap was not about capability. It was about who the frame was built around. LEXVVR AI, I know a lot of people see it at first and say LEXVVR. That's fine, but we pronounce it as LEXVVR AI, and it's built to change that frame. Legal intelligence designed for plaintiff side practice, not adapted from something built from a different kind of law, but built from the ground up. The frame matters. I think about that when I think about who we're building it for. Community-centered AI for me does not mean adding access as an afterthought. It means starting there. Asking who is doing consequential work with the least support? What do they actually need? What does a system have to be in order to generally be useful in that environment? That changes the design from the beginning. Not just the interface, not just the pricing, the fundamental questions the system is trying to answer. I want to say one more thing because I think it's relevant in this room. And let me get to the slide that would correlate with what I'm saying right now. The experience of using something and sensing it was not built for you, that is information. It tells you something about where the design process started. It tells you something about whose needs were centered. And it points toward a gap. Gaps are where the work is. not because filling them is a moral obligation, though sometimes it is, but because they represent real unmet needs. The environments that have been building without adequate tools, the communities that have been working without infrastructure designed for them, those are not edge cases. They are often where the leverage is highest, and they are almost always where the most important problems are already being worked on by people who know the terrain better than anyone. The session title asks us to think about three things: trust, teams, and access. I want to take each of those seriously because I think they are more connected than they appear. Trust is not a feature added at the end. It's an architectural decision. It lives in how data is sourced, how uncertainty is handled, and how outputs are communicated to the humans relying on them. In a legal context, trust has one requirement. The professional using the system has to be able to stand behind it, not just accept the output, but understand it well enough to be accountable for what comes next. That is not a preference. It is an ethical obligation the profession imposes. A system that cannot be questioned is not a useful system in this environment. It is a liability. Trust has to be built in from the beginning, not layered on after the fact. Teams carry knowledge that no system alone can replicate. When an experienced paralegal knows about how a particular judge responds, what a case manager remembers about a client that never made it to the file, what an attorney has internalized over years of contingency work about which cases are worth taking, that knowledge lives in people. And when it's not supported by systems that help it compound and persist, it disappears when people leave. The future I'm interested in is not one where systems replace that judgment. It is one where every person on a team has better information at the moment they need to make a decision, so their judgment can actually do its job. The human decides. That is not a constraint on the system. That is the design. The hardest thing to design for is the firm that cannot afford to be wrong. Small plaintiff side firms operate on contingency. Every case they take is a bet. The knowledge that would help them make better decisions exists. It is sitting in closed files and institutional memory. But it has not been made available to the firms that need it most because they were not the design premise. Access does not mean giving everyone the same tool. It means building tools that are actually designed for the people who need them most. There's a phrase I keep coming back to: shared intelligence. It sounds like a technical term, a system design, a data architecture, but I think it is a social one. The kind of intelligence that actually serves communities is not built by one person or one company or one data set in isolation. It's built when the people closest to the problem have a real stake in the solution. When the attorneys who take these cases have data that reflects their actual practice. When the systems that support them are designed around their real constraints, the constraints of firms 10 times their size. One of the hardest choices we have made as a company is resisting unnecessary speed. There are moments where systems should accelerate, and then there are moments where systems should pause. Decision points, risk assessments, human consequences. Being different means designing technology that knows the difference. That surfaces uncertainty, that invites scrutiny, that respects the weight of judgment. The future will not belong to the systems that process the most data. It will belong to the systems that earn the most trust. Trust from professionals, trust from clients, trust from communities. And trust does not come from opacity. It comes from clarity, from restraint, from accountability. I want to get to the last slide, which is revisiting what I said at the beginning. I want to come back to where we started, photography. The first time you photograph a place, you see what's obvious. You frame what's in front of you. But the 100th time, something has shifted. Not the scene, you. You know where the light falls at a particular hour. You know what the frame misses by default. You know how to compensate. The tool did not change, your judgment did. After you take a photo, you do not control how it is interpreted, but you are responsible for how you framed it. That is the model I find most interesting in this work. Not systems that improve in the abstract, systems that develop alongside the people using them, that carry the accumulated experience of a given community, their history, their judgment, their particular way of understanding a problem, and make that accessible in a way that helps them do their work better. That kind of intelligence does not come from anywhere else. It belongs to the people who built it, which means designing for it requires actually being in the room with them, listening before building, staying close enough to the real environment that the gaps become visible, not as edge cases to be addressed later, but as the thing you are solving from the beginning. That is what this work means to me, and to every person who has chosen to build it alongside us, at the team, at LEXVVR, the partners who believe in what we're creating, the practitioners who trusted us enough to be in the room. We are not just building a platform, we are changing what legal intelligence look like for the communities that need it most and never had it. If you want to follow us on our journey, you could find us on LinkedIn. You search LEXVVR AI to find our company page. And if you want to experience LEXVVR AI for yourself, you could contact us at contact@lexvvr.ai.